James Joseph Croce was born on a cold winter day in South Philadelphia on January the 10th, 1943. His father, James Albert, and his mother, Florrie Mary, were the children of immigrants who had traveled across the ocean from the towns of Trasasco and Balsarano in the Abruzzi region of Italy. They settled into the brick row houses of South Philadelphia, a neighborhood where working hard was a standard and a secure job with a pension was the ultimate dream for a young man. His parents were traditional Italian Catholics, who viewed music as a pleasant hobby or a social grace, rather than a path toward a professional career. Despite their practical expectations, their home was never silent. The young boy spent his earliest years surrounded by a collection of records that spanned the vast history of American and European sound. He listened to the operatic power of Enrico Caruso and the gritty, soulful blues of Bessie Smith. He absorbed the syncopated rhythms of ragtime and the playful, rhythmic jazz of Fats Waller. When he was 5 years old, his parents put an accordion in his hands, and he began performing for anyone who would listen, at family gatherings and church socials. He learned to play Lady of Spain, a song that became his first signature piece in those early years of public performance. The family eventually moved 7 miles west of the city to Upper Darby Township, where he attended Upper Darby High School. He graduated in 1960, a young man who was beginning to find that the accordion could not quite capture the new sounds he was hearing on the radio and in the local clubs. The folk movement of the late 1950s was starting to take hold in the Philadelphia area, and he found himself captivated by the stories told in sea chanties and old Irish ballads. He was drawn to the music of Woody Guthrie and Jimmy Rogers, songs that spoke of the common man, the struggles of the working class, and the call of the open road. When he was 15, he decided he needed a guitar to properly explore these new interests. Money was not easy to come by in a household that favored stability and savings, but he eventually convinced his father to trade his younger brother's neglected clarinet for a used instrument. They went to a pawn shop located along a rough stretch of Philadelphia's Skid Row and walked away with a used Harmony S-slot acoustic guitar. He began the slow process of teaching himself how to play, moving beyond the melodies of the accordion and into the world of R&B, rock and roll, and country blues. After graduating from high school, he spent 1 year at Malvern Preparatory School before enrolling at Villanova University in 1961. His arrival on campus was a significant moment of pride for his parents, as he was the first member of his family to attend college. He initially majored in psychology and took a minor in German, but it was clear from his first semester that his true education was happening outside the lecture halls. He spent his nights and weekends playing in various campus bands, frequently performing at fraternity parties and smaller universities around Philadelphia. He became a lead singer for the Villanova Singers and a member of the Villanova Spires, a vocal group that recorded off-campus under the name the Coventry Lads. Music was not just a performance for him. It was a way to connect with people and understand their lives and their perspectives. He was known for playing anything the crowd wanted to hear, whether it was a cappella harmonies, traditional railroad songs, or the latest rock hits. In the booth of the campus radio station, he worked as a student disc jockey, spinning the records that had influenced him as a child and learning the mechanics of the broadcast world. One of the most transformative experiences of his college years occurred when his band was chosen for a foreign exchange tour, sponsored by the university. They spent time traveling through Africa, Yugoslavia, and the Middle East, often sleeping in the woods and sharing meals with the people they met along the way. The language barrier was often total. He didn't understand them, and they didn't understand him. Yet he noticed that the audience could feel the truth in the music, if the performer was sincere enough. He later described these travels with great affection, noting that if you truly mean what you are saying, people will understand regardless of the words you use. By the time he returned to Pennsylvania to continue his degree, his photographic memory had allowed him to build a massive mental library of approximately 2,500 songs. He was a student who was deeply immersed in the folk movement, and his repertoire was constantly expanding to include the music of contemporary artists like Ian and Sylvia. It was nearing the end of his time at Villanova when he walked into the Philadelphia Convention Hall on November the 29th, 1963. He was there to serve as a judge for a Hooteny band competition, a popular event in the local folk scene that drew talent from across the city. As he watched the group perform, a 16-year-old singer named Ingrid Jacobson took the stage with the winning group. He was immediately struck by her voice and her presence. They met that evening and the connection was so strong that they fell in love almost instantly. This meeting marked the end of his solitary journey as a wandering campus musician and the beginning of a partnership that would reshape the rest of his life. He would eventually graduate from Villanova in 1965 with a Bachelor of Science in Social Studies, but his heart had already been won by a different kind of future. The year 1966 marked a season of profound change for Jim Croce, as he married Ingrid Jacobson and began a life defined by shared creative purpose. He converted to Judaism, and the two were wed in a traditional service, but the early days of their marriage were shaded by the practical concerns of his family. His parents remained deeply skeptical of his musical ambitions, preferring that he utilize his university education to secure a stable profession with a pension. As a wedding gift, they presented him with $500, on the strict condition that it be used to record an album. This gesture was actually a calculated test, as they privately hoped the record would fail and finally convince him to abandon music for a conventional career. Jim used the money to record a self-issued project titled Face It, and to the surprise of his parents, every one of the 500 pressed copies was sold. The momentum of his musical life was briefly interrupted when he joined the Army National Guard. He left for active duty just a week after his honeymoon and spent 4 months in basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Jim was not naturally inclined to follow orders, and eventually found himself enduring basic training twice, joke-telling that he was at least prepared should a war ever require the use of mobs for defense. Despite the rigors of military life, he remained an observer of the world around him. Upon his return to Pennsylvania, Jim and Ingrid began performing together as a folk duo, traveling extensively throughout the East and the South. They spent the next few years living a nomadic existence, driving over 300,000 miles to play in small clubs, coffee houses, and on the college concert circuit. Between the musical tours, Jim supported the couple through a long series of odd jobs. He worked on construction crews, served as a welder, taught guitar at a summer camp, and worked as a teacher at junior high school in South Philadelphia. For a time, he earned a living driving tractor trailers, hauling stone across the New England landscape. He carried a small tape recorder in the cab of his truck and logged the conversations of the characters he encountered at truck stops and bars, viewing the road as a rich source of storytelling. In 1968, a former college friend and fellow musician, Tommy West, encouraged the couple to move to New York City to pursue a major record deal. They moved into a section of the Bronx and eventually signed with Capitol Records. The following year, they released a collaborative album, but the transition into a professional music industry was not what they had imagined. The recording contract heavily favored the company, and various delay left the couple in deep financial distress. Jim found the mechanics of the city and the music business to be predatory and exhausting, and he never truly felt at home in the concrete jungle. The disappointment of the New York experience eventually led them to sell all but one of their guitars to pay the rent and retreat back to the Pennsylvania countryside. They moved into an old farmhouse in Lindell that overlooked the Brandywine River, seeking a quieter pace of life. Jim returned to manual labor and took a job at a Philadelphia radio station, where he translated commercials into soul slang, but his musical life continued in the evenings. He played for $25 a night at local venues like the Riddle Paddock Steakhouse, performing a mix of blues, country, and folk covers. By the winter of 1970, the quiet of the Lindell farmhouse was beginning to feel less like a retreat and more like a heavy weight. Jim and Ingrid were living on the edge of financial collapse, selling off their remaining guitars to keep the roof over their heads. The dream of a career in music felt more distant than ever, a reality that only became more urgent on a single night in December, when Ingrid shared 2 pieces of news that would change everything. She had spent that evening entering a recipe into a national baking contest, a small hope for some extra money. But when she spoke to Jim later that night, she told him she was expecting their first child. The announcement brought a complicated wave of emotion. Jim was initially filled with a sense of terror at the prospect of providing for a new life, when they were already struggling. But that fear almost immediately transformed into a fierce, singular motivation. He realized that his music could no longer be a series of false starts or a pleasant hobby. It was now a mission. As Jim was finding his narrative voice, he was also introduced to the man who would help him find his final musical shape. A college friend named Sal Joseph suggested that Jim meet a classically trained musician from Trenton, New Jersey, named Maury Mulaisen. I'm sorry for pronouncing that wrong. I'm trying my best. Maury was a gifted musician, and when the two first met at the production office in New York, the chemistry was immediate, but not yet fully realized. In the beginning, Jim actually played backup guitar for Maury, supporting Maury's own solo aspirations. However, as they spent more time together, their roles naturally reversed. It became clear that Jim's warm baritone and rhythmic guitar style were the perfect foundation for Maury's incredible technical skill. Maury began adding a delicate, complex lead guitar to Jim's songs, creating a signature sound that defined their partnership. They were a study in contrast that worked perfectly. Jim brought a robust, finger-picked rhythm, while Maury wove intricate acoustic filigree and bluesy riffs around the melodies. The pairing of Jim's Gibson Dove and Maury's Martin acoustic guitars created a warm, contrapuntal texture that made the songs feel both intimate and sophisticated. But Maury was more than just a musical accompanist. He was a close friend and a vital creative sounding board. He understood how to frame Jim's stories about truckers, pool hustlers, and heartbroken soldiers with exactly the right melodic touch. While Jim sang about the common man with a friendly, engaging sincerity, Maury's lead work provided an emotional undercurrent that elevated the folk songs into something, well, a bit more profound. The collaboration gave Jim the confidence to put his new material into a cassette and send it to his producers, Terry Cashman and Tommy West, who immediately recognized that the songwriting and the musicianship had reached a new level of excellence. The arrival of Jim's son, Adrian James, in September 1971, served as a final piece of the puzzle. With the baby now in the world, the stakes were higher than they had ever been. Jim continued to tour the small coffee house and college circuit with Maury, often performing for very little money, while much of his earnings went toward paying back the advances from his record company. Despite this financial pressure, the duo's live performances were building a reputation for being genuinely engaging and sincere. Jim would share stories on the road and the characters he had met while driving trucks, and then he and Maury would launch into an intricate guitar work that had become their trademark. By the time they were ready to enter the studio to record the breakthrough album, their musical language was fully formed. The songs Jim had written in the 10-day burst at the kitchen table were no longer just demos on a cassette, they had been refined through countless nights of playing together in bars and fraternity houses. Each performance tightening the bond a little bit between Jim's voice and Maury's guitar. The anticipation of the birth of AJ had given Jim the drive to write, and his partnership with Maury had given those songs the wings they needed to fly. The transition from the kitchen table in Lindell to the professional atmosphere of the Hit Factory in New York City took place during the final months of 1971. Working with the production team led by Terry Cashman and Tommy West, Jim spent between 3 and 4 weeks recording the 12 tracks that would eventually form his commercial breakthrough. The project operated on a modest budget of $18,000, an investment provided by the Polygram Group in the Netherlands, after they heard an 8-song demo tape presented by production attorney Phil Kernett. The recording environment was defined by a tight-knit collaborative energy, featuring a core group of musicians including lead guitarist Maury Mulaysen, drummer Gary Chester, and bassist Joe Macho. Producer Tommy West was more of a versatile character, playing keyboards, percussion, and rhythmic guitar, while ensuring that the focus remained on the raw talent of Jim, the songwriter. The resulting record stood in stark contrast to the sonically explorative and heavy rock that dominated the charts in 1972. Instead of chasing flashy experiments, the production embraced a beautiful and stripped-down simplicity that focused on highlighting Jim's affable personality and superb songwriting. Every element of the recording was designed to showcase his warm, intimate vocals and the unique organic chemistry he shared with Maury. Pete Dino was brought in to provide expert string arrangements that added a layer of emotional sophistication without overwhelming the acoustic foundation of the songs. Bruce Turkison served as the recording and mixing engineer, capturing the clear highs and tight bass that allowed Jim's voice to sit perfectly in the mix. Even with a completed master of such high quality, the path to reaching a national audience was blocked by significant industry indifference. The finished masters were shipped to approximately 40 different record labels, and every single one of them rejected the album. The breakthrough finally happened during a chance encounter between the producers and an ABC Records promotion representative named Marty Cupps. After Cupps heard cuts from a cassette tape of the finished album, he recognized the commercial potential immediately and urged label president Jay Lasker to sign the songwriter. And Jim was finally signed to a major label deal that would launch his career into the public eye in April 1972. The title track, You Don't Mess Around with Jim, served as the primary introduction to the artist's narrative style and quickly became his debut single. It was a fast-paced folk fable concerning an urban character named Big Jim Walker, a pool-shooting son of a gun who ruled an underground hall on West 42nd Street. Jim based the character on real people he encountered while selling radio airtime in shady Philadelphia pool halls earlier in his life. He would spend time watching the games and observing the interaction of the regulars, gathering the sensory details that would eventually become lyrics. The track was noted for its catchy wit and a spoken recitation that added to its saloon atmosphere. Musically, it blended Ray Charles-style R&B with Jim's folk tenor, supported by the soulful backing vocals of Ellie Greenwich and Tasha Thomas. The song eventually reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100, proving that there was indeed a massive audience for his brand of character-driven music. For the second single, the production team chose a song that revealed a much more sensitive and vulnerable side of the songwriter. Operator, That's Not the Way It Feels, was a poignant narrative of loss and economic struggle that originated from Jim's experiences in the Army National Guard. In 1966, while stationed at Fort Jackson for basic training, he observed long lines of soldiers, waiting in the rain to use a single outdoor payphone. He listened as they pleaded with manual switchboard operators to connect them with loved ones back home, often fearing they might receive a Dear John letter during the brief connection. The song captures one side of a desperate conversation as a man tries to find the phone number of a former lover, who has moved to Los Angeles with his former best friend, Ray. The protagonist tries to convince the operator and himself that he has overcome the betrayal, but the tears in his eyes prevent him from even reading the number. Jim's conversational style and specific phrases like "you can keep the dime" created a narrative intimacy that felt universally relatable. The track featured intricate fingerstyle acoustic guitar and a steady, reflective bass that supported its emotional delivery. Perhaps the most enduring icon, and probably also the most streamed song to this day, was "Time in a Bottle," the hauntingly personal lullaby written for Jim's wife and their unborn son. The song was composed on the very night Jim learned that Ingrid was pregnant, a moment that shifted the entire mission in the music industry. He realized that time was the most precious thing he possessed and expressed a desire to save every day in a bottle, to spend them again with the people he loved. Lyrically, the song was a meditation on the beauty of their lives together and the realization that there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want once you finally find them. The arrangement was elevated by a distinctive harpsichord that Tommy West discovered by chance when it was left behind in the mixing studio. Adding to the mix, along with Spanish guitar riffs and Jim's aching head voice, the harpsichord creates a timeless and fragile atmosphere. Other tracks on the record further illustrated the diverse narrative spectrum Jim was capable of navigating with ease. "Tomorrow's Gonna Be a Brighter Day" was an upbeat promise of loyalty and domestic apology to Ingrid, while "Hard Time Losing Man" served as a comedic character study of chronic blue-collar misfortune. "Photographs and Memories" offered a nostalgic exploration of lost love, utilizing a dissonant motive and an unresolved chord to mirror the fragmented nature of human memory. Rapid Roy, the stock car boy, introduced a rockabilly-tinged portrait of a dirt track racer, while Box Number 10 wove a tale of a dejected musician who must frequently call his parents to ask for money. The release of the Breakthrough album in early 1972 transformed a former truck driver and construction worker into a national presence almost overnight. Over the next 18 months, the musician transitioned from an opening act at a small venue to a headlining star, performing in more than 250 concerts in a single year. This period of relentless activity saw him appearing on iconic television programs like American Bandstand, Tonight Show, and The Dick Cavett Show, as his stories reached a massive new audience. In early 1973, his second major label album, Life and Times, produced the hit Bad Bad Leroy Brown, which became his first and only #1 single during his lifetime. Despite the gold records and the soaring popularity he had waited for years, the pressure of continuous touring began to take a significant mental and physical toll. He spent pretty much all of his time away from his wife Ingrid and their young son Adrian James, a sacrifice that left him deeply homesick and physically exhausted. The financial reality of his success was also complicated by bad business agreements that left him feeling broke despite his high profile. Seeking a fresh start and a quieter pace of life, the family relocated to San Diego, California in 1973. While on the road, he frequently expressed a desire to simplify his life and move away from the grueling schedule of a touring musician. In a final letter to Ingrid that arrived after his death, he detailed his plan to quit the music business once the current tour concluded. He shared dreams of spending more time at home and pursuing a new career as a writer of short stories and movie scripts. This desire to reclaim time and focus on his family became the underlying current of his final weeks. The end of the story arrived with shocking suddenness on the evening of the 20th of September 1973. After completing a concert at Northwestern State University's Prater Coliseum in Louisiana, He and his crew he and his crew boarded a private flight. The plane was headed for Sherman, Texas, where he was scheduled to play a concert at Austin College. Tragically, the plane failed to gain enough altitude during takeoff and crashed into a large pecan tree at the end of the runway. All 6 people on board were killed instantly, including the singer and his close friend and musical partner, Mari Mulaisen. An investigation later suggested that the 57-year-old pilot had suffered a physical impairment, possibly a heart attack, after running 3 miles from a motel to the airport just before the flight. The news of the tragedy made the singer a household name, as a wave of public mourning and renewed interest in his work began to build. Just 1 day after the crash, his record label released the single I Got a Name, which had been intended to lead his upcoming 3rd album. The song, which served as the theme for the film The Last American Hero, quickly ascended into the top 10. However, it was actually a song from his first ABC album that captured the national mood most perfectly. Time in a Bottle began receiving massive airplay on radio stations across the country. The song had recently been featured in a movie called She Lives. The lyrics about the precious and fleeting nature of time took on a profound new meaning for a grieving public. Driven by this overwhelming demand, ABC Records released Time in a Bottle as a single in November 1973. In early 1974, it reached the #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100. Making him only the 3rd artist in history to achieve a posthumous chart topper. This success pulled his breakthrough album, You Don't Mess Around with Jim, to the top of the Billboard 200, where it remained for 5 weeks. For a period in early 1974, his albums were so popular that all 3 of his major releases were crowding the top of the sales charts simultaneously. This posthumous surge cemented his legacy as a chronicler of the common man, who could translate the struggles and joys of everyday life into accessible and beautiful folk rock. The story of his music did not end with his passing, as his family took on the role of caretakers for his legacy. Ingrid opened a restaurant and jazz bar in San Diego that served as a long-running homage to their shared history, and she authored books that provided a more complete picture of the men behind the denim jackets. Their son, Adrian James, who was just 2 years old when his father died, eventually followed in those musical footsteps. Performing under the name A.J. Croce, he became a respected musician and pianist in his own right, eventually launching a tour where he performed his father's song for a new generation of listeners. The intergenerational connection ensured that the stories about pool hustlers, heartbreaks, and the roads remained alive in the public consciousness. Formal recognition from the music industry followed in 1990, when he was posthumously inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. His songs continued to appear in films and television shows, finding new relevance in modern media like Stranger Things and X-Men. In March 2022, a blue historical marker was installed in Lindell, Pennsylvania, near the old farmhouse overlooking the Brandywine River. The plaque identifies the site where many of his most famous songs were written at the sample kitchen table during a 10-day creative burst. Bye.